We have this idea of what we think diversity looks like, but we don't know what diversity in practice looks like. And to me, diversity in practice is really dismantling the power structure and these systems that we're operating in to ensure that marginalized people are in positions of power, because that's the only way that the product changes.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are making things happen today. My name is Michael T. Johnson, and I'm here with my co-host Tyler Kelly, and we are at Venture Cafe St. Louis tonight. So Venture Cafe is the #1 largest gathering of entrepreneurs and creators who are making things happen anywhere. So we're very, very excited to be here. And we have Rikki Byrd with us tonight.
Welcome, welcome. For those of you who don't know, Rikki is a writer, educator, scholar with interest in Black studies, visual culture, fashion history, and cultural studies. And for the Miami friends that we have that are listening in, your research has appeared at Art Basel and has been published in various academic journals and books, and you've written for Hyperallergic, Racked, Fashionista, and other media outlets. And then you were most recently a faculty member at WashU here in St. Louis, where you developed courses on the intersections of fashion and race for Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts and African American Studies departments. Awesome.
Yes.
So there's a lot of fun stuff we can talk about. Fashion, art, how that intersects with like diversity and race.
Absolutely.
And when I was doing some looking into like some of your passions and all that, let me just read this because I thought this was the place to start. This is your purpose, is like making sure that Black people have the resources to tell their stories. And that's what you do as a writer.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Yes. Where do we begin? So I guess let's start the conversation with diversity, because
Okay.
I think that that's always this hot button topic across several industries. And so I operate in different industries. I operate within media, fashion, and higher education, 3 industries that are always having this conversation. So when you're in the fashion industry, they're always looking for more models of color on the runways or more models of color on the covers of magazines, right? If you're in media, you're looking to always give more opportunities for writers of color to interview, other people of color or tell their stories, because for so long those stories have been in other people's hands. And then in higher education, trying to diversify the staff or trying to have more retention for students of color. But we know what diversity looks like, right? Like I always think of it when I went to undergrad, they would send out kind of these diversity pamphlets, and you would have that, that one Black person in the photo, or that one Black person graduating. And so we have this idea of what we think diversity looks like, but we don't know what diversity in practice looks like. And to me, diversity in practice is really dismantling the power structure and these systems that we're operating in to ensure that marginalized people are in positions of power, because that's the only way that the product changes. And so within media, that's the only way that stories changes. That's the only way the content that we're engaging with on an everyday basis shifts, is if we actually put people from these marginalized areas into these positions of power. And not on some like, oh, this is affirmative action or anything, right? But because these people are talented. I'm talented as a Black writer, whether or not I have the education or training or not. Like I'm talented, I have the story and the capacity to tell the story. And really what the disparity is oftentimes is that people don't have the resources to tell those stories fully and completely in the way that they should be able to. And so it's my hopes that through the work that I do, and hopefully that my work serves as advocacy within itself, to see what it looks like at the very least when a Black person has the opportunity to tell their own story.
Okay. And you brought up the picture of what an advertising department might frame as diversity. and that most likely is not coming from a black person,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And so by putting those marginalized people in a place where they can tell their own story, then you get the real story.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Absolutely.
I mean, it seems like you're also talking about power structure, where the gatekeepers to a lot of these things have always typically been white men.
Yes.
So we see this in like the movie industry and writing, like it permeates everything right now. So
Yeah. I mean, even when you look at, I think the entertainment industry is where you see it kind of at play a lot. And so as you start to kind of, what am I thinking of? Like Oscar So White, which was a hashtag a few years ago, when no black person was nominated for an Oscar. So we're starting to slowly pull back those layers, right? And it's a lot of people of color taking up the initiative. And I think that social media shifted that landscape and kind of allowed for people to have the space to, even if that person necessarily isn't telling the story, at least they can reveal the fact that the stories aren't being told, and then hopefully there's someone else who can come in and kind of seize that opportunity.
And that's kind of what you're doing when you're writing, is you kind of get that started in the hopes that somebody will pick it up and run with it.
Yes.
Is that kind of, so
Yes.
tell me a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
so not a lot of the work that I do, but I would say like the writing that I do in the media, and I guess a lot of my academic writing too is kind of introductory.
Okay.
And so it's because I don't sometimes have the resources or the capacity to actually tell the story in full. But it's to introduce you to the fact that this story hasn't been told, or it's been kind of riding under the radar for so long, or this person that you haven't even considered has had, an extensive or lucrative career, or very much so impacted these various industries. And why aren't we talking about them? In hopes that we can broaden that. So, for example, last summer I was in Los Angeles and I interviewed a woman by the name of Ceci, who was a costume designer. And I was most interested in her because the television show Dear White People had just come out on Netflix. And because my research is in fashion and African American studies, I'm always looking at clothes and like how is the clothing working to tell a story as well. And so I was watching Dear White People and I was just like, this is good, but the clothes are better. Because the clothes are really telling us a story about the characters and about their politics, and more. And so I was just like, I have to find out who this person is that's dressing these people. And it took a while. It took a lot of digging. And I just came across this name, Ceci. There was no last name, and I was just like, is this a real person? I don't know if this was a collective or what it might be. And so I just kept Googling and found like an Instagram page and a Facebook page for her. And I just contacted her and I was just like, hey, can I interview you about Dear White People? And she was just like, yes. And so I talked to her, but I also was doing some more research and found out that she was a costume designer for all of these popular 90s black sitcoms. So A Different World, Sister Sister, Living Single, like all of these popular sitcoms, where she had really crafted these characters through clothing that people emulate to this day. And so when I met her in Los Angeles, she had no idea that she had left an impact and a legacy on the industry. Because at this time, A Different World, I think, the syndication that came out on Netflix too. And a lot of people for like costume parties and all these articles were coming out about like the different characters that she was dressing. And I was just like, do you know about any of this? And she was just like, I had no idea. And so from that article, people realizing that, and she was also very clear in the article that we talk about the actors. We talked about the directors that aren't present, the black directors and black actors that aren't present in the industry, but nobody knows that this permeates deeper into the industry, right? And so we don't know that there aren't black makeup artists or black hairstylists or black costume designers, and that I'm one of few. And so how that's a bigger story, right? Of how now I either can take that or someone else can take that, but that's introductory work that I've done for someone else to say, this is a bigger issue. Like we actually need to dig deeper, because it's not enough for us to just see at the Oscars next year or films that are coming out in 2018. It's not enough for us to just see a bunch of black actors in a movie, right? It's bigger. It's a bigger issue. And for someone like her to be able to reveal that story and for me to be able to tell that story. And also I think it's important too for me to be able to sit down with her as a black writer, and she's a black costume designer, and her to be able to feel comfortable enough to open up, and tell me that truth. because I think that there's protection that's there too when some of these subjects or some of these stories are being told. You sometimes don't get all of the transparency because there's just, there's a history there, right, of like our stories haven't been told in the proper way or in the fullest way or to the fullest capacity. And so I think that that's also precious too, is that I'm able to kind of talk to these people, subjects, and kind of get a bigger narrative and a bigger story.
So you're talking about like there's a history of stories not being told, marginalized people's stories not being told. Are you seeing a change? Because like we always hear about like the tools to tell stories have kind of been democratized, but is that kind of spreading to marginalized communities? Is there an opportunity there that not used to be?
I think that, like I said, I think that social media has definitely democratized media in a way, in a good way and in a bad way. I think we can argue. Because everyone has access to it. But I think it's been a way for people to mobilize, around issues and find a collective ground to stand on. And from there, you see, I can speak specifically about kind of Black writers getting opportunities to write certain stories. And you'll see on Twitter often, hire Black writers to write stories about Black people or to write Black stories about, these certain instances or entities. Sometimes, though, I do think that could, in the long term, be a detriment to Black writers and writers of color, because there's always this underscoring fear that this could become a trend. Right. And so if we think about trends in the same way we think about fashion, is that I'm going to wear a coat in the wintertime because it's cold and I'm warming my body, but in the summer I don't need it anymore. And so once these issues are out of the way, or once this kind of pop culture moment has passed, we don't need Black writers anymore. And sometimes that's my kind of unnerving fear, is that, yes, this is so great. This is so great that all of these Black writers are rising to the top and they're becoming popular and they're getting these opportunities. But what happens, when there could possibly be, in the way that it has been historically, this fades, right? Like even within the 90s, I was mentioning that costume designer, or she made the argument, you had all these 90s Black sitcoms. Like those sitcoms that I named were coming back to back to back. There was a moment collectively, and then it faded off because if it hadn't faded, we wouldn't have been having conversations like Oscar So White. We wouldn't be having conversations about like where are all of the Black directors and writers and all these different things. And so there's a fear that this is cyclical. And so we could reach that same moment, and then what happens to all of these Black writers and cultural producers?
Is that, I'm thinking that's maybe because at the end of the day, the people that are controlling the money out west, like there's no diversity there. Let's just say that.
Absolutely.
So, but that's what's cool about distribution as it begins to get easier. Like music artists at this point, they can just go straight to Spotify and get paid on whether people listen and stream the music. So is it maybe we can see that in visual entertainment in the future, where an artist or an actor or a writer could just produce it, put it out, and kind of
if they're equipped with the resources,
new power structure. You know what I mean?
If they're equipped with the resources and they get in those positions to make decisions, and I think I do think that it's very slow, but I do think that there is slowly a shift happening with people who are in decision making positions, who can be activists for these issues and also advocate to bring other people that look like them on. And so I'm thinking of Elaine Welteroth, who was the first Black editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue magazine, and you saw the content shift. And it wasn't content that was like, we just need to focus on everything that has to do with my identity. But because of her view as a Black woman in the world and the ways in which she observed the world, she was able to realize and have empathy for different marginalized groups, right? And so you saw the content change. And so that's an example that I always kind of go to. But even if you think about people like directors like Ava DuVernay, and Ryan Coogler. So there are things happening where you're definitely starting to see people in these decision making powers who are not just like, oh, I'm in this position now, so everything's good, everything's fixed because I represent all of these things. It's just like you see them actually making an effort to mentor and to train and to advocate for really transforming these industries, which I think is important.
That sounds like a big challenge too. Like I want to go back to something you said about I want to like having a black writer write about black things rather than having a black writer because they're the authority on whatever. Not the black community, but like they're an authority on the subject just because they are. How do we attack that? Like how do we deal with that system that is keeping that from happening?
Keeping black writers or writers of color from telling these stories,
or just any marginalized person at all. Like you're talking about, like your fear of that person just only like it's almost like you just hire that person to write about
that one thing
or the one thing.
Yeah, because you're not necessarily interested in their talent. You're not interested in their training. You're interested in their identity, and that's where I'm saying that's
just like
kind of
checking a box.
Yeah, you're checking a box. That kind of like affirmative action type of thing comes into play.
What's the step to get us to?
Oh, it starts at the very beginning, right? Like I think that a lot of people think these issues are happenstance or like they're just these one-off occurrences. When it's really like when we talk about things being systematic, it's like literally as if you go to a factory, right? Like you have all these lines until you get to the main product. And so I think that once we realize, I'm trying to think of an example. Like once we realize, for example, I have a journalism degree. My undergraduate degree is in journalism. And so we can look at, like, say, for instance, a major media outlet and say, oh, they're getting the headlines wrong, or they're not producing the stories, or they're having the wrong people writing the stories because there's just not enough black people in the newsroom, or there are not enough marginalized people in the newsroom. Not realizing that in journalism schools, right, there aren't enough marginalized people, and they're not getting the opportunities. Or if these students are getting accepted into these schools, they don't have the same economic background as some of their peers. And so they are presented with different challenges. And so while they might not drop out, they might have to work several jobs, meaning maybe their grades aren't there. You know what I'm saying? And so then, or they take out all these loans so they can finish school. And so then going into a field that you really wanted to be in, right? The creative industries are very difficult to break into. But, you know, to go into a field that's really not set up for you to make a lot of money initially. I mean, you can, but you really have to be committed and dedicated to it to see your way through. And so if I have faced all of these challenges off of the very essence that I've drafted this idea of who I wanted to be in the world or what I wanted to pursue in my life, and once I get out into the world and I have all of these loans and I have all of these other things working against me, yes, the end product it's not going to look the way that it is kind of going to look the way that kind of the beginning of that that matter started to, you know, what we started with. And so I think that we have to realize that this is systematic, and we have to start creating something from the very beginning that really changes what we get to in the end. Yeah, we need to break down the system because it's not enough anymore for us to just say like, oh, like this major media outlet started a diversity initiative. And so like, let's go into like this school in this area in this community and this, that, and the other. Okay, fine, we're done. We did that. That was our initiative for 2018.
Same system, same results.
Same system, same results. You know, you got that grant to do that thing, and now you don't have to do it anymore. And you have 3 marginalized folks in your company. So why do we need to make any more changes, you know? And so... yeah, the system has to, that's the only way. And it takes work. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work by a lot of people. And so I think that there's a laziness there and an argument that's like, well, it's been working all along. But I think what's happening now is people are saying that it's not working anymore. And I think it requires capital to actually have to break that system down. And people, you know, who have the big bucks, they're selfish with their big bucks. And so they're just, no, we're okay. And so, but to me, that's the only way that it changes. You got to start with the premise of the system.
Yeah. we had Dee Nichols on a couple episodes ago, and she was talking about kind of the same thing, and I just remember this quote from her that like all these systems are created by people, which means we can reinvent them all. And like that's kind of our hope, is that we can reinvent these systems, but sometimes knowing where to start is the hardest place.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
When there's so many layers.
Yes, a lot of layers, a lot.
So tell me about some of. You mentioned the costume designer Ceci.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about some of your the projects that you're most fond of that are out there that like you just put your heart and soul. I mean, I'm sure you put your heart and soul into everything. But
I try.
The ones that stick with you.
Yes. Okay. Let's see. I'll start with writing first. I do a lot. What did we say? I'm a writer, educator, and scholar. So I do a lot. But I'll start with writing. I wrote this story that was published last fall, and it's called When Bergdorf's Served Chitlins and Chicken. And so I had stumbled upon this research when I was in graduate school at Parsons in New York, and found out that there was this event at Bergdorf Goodman in the 60s where soul food was served. And I was like, that's interesting. Bergdorf Goodman? I was just like, I don't get what's going on here. And so I was like, I tried to make it a part of my thesis, which is another work that I'm proud of. I tried to make it a part of my thesis, and it just didn't fit in. And so I think in Thanksgiving 2016, Neiman Marcus, they were selling collard greens, frozen collard greens, for like $60 or something. And I didn't think anything of, I mean, it was silly, it was crazy, it was on Twitter, and, you know, there was a hashtag and everything, because, I mean, black people make collard greens for way
Just
cheaper
like
than $66.
on their website
They
or
were
something?
selling it on their website, so you can
Interesting.
buy them frozen, and they would get shipped to your house, and it's a very odd thing.
Yeah.
And why would someone do that? But people did, they sold out.
Wow.
The collard greens sold out. And so within the next year, I was just going through some research that I had been doing, and I stumbled upon that research that I started at Parsons. And so I was drawing connections. And so it turned into like this 2,000 plus word article where I was really researching what are the implications of soul food being in these luxury retailers, right? These luxury retailers that historically did not, even if they allowed black shoppers, they didn't allow them to do certain things like return clothes or try on clothes, or I throughout my research and in the story, I talk about Woolworth. So there was a Woolworth store in Harlem that opened a soul food kitchen. And this happened in the 90s. But of course, we know historically Woolworths in the South, that's where the sit-ins happened, where college students went to have sit-ins because they weren't being served. And so what's the history there? But then in the contemporary sense, too, you have black people who are going into these luxury retailers and being accused of stealing, credit card fraud, all of these different things, right? But you're selling or marketing these items that are historically rooted in black culture. And so that was a really... that was really fulfilling work. And so it was published on rack.com. It's a long form piece. So if anyone out there is going to read it, it is 2,000 plus words. So take time out for it. But
and we'll put it in the show notes.
Yes, that was one of my proudest pieces, because there were just so many moving parts. And I really did challenge myself to put all of those historical narratives together, but to ask this overarching question that's just like, on this, and plenty of people have said it before, so this isn't my quote necessarily, but people love black culture, but they don't love black people. And so that was kind of a thing that stuck with me while I was writing that piece. Again, my thesis I wrote at Parsons, it was called Black the Color We Wear, Representing Blackness in American Fashion, and I was really questioning kind of this twofold thing. So what happens when you have these moments where black people really have pride in themselves through really what they're wearing, and And so I looked at the 60s and 70s, looking at the civil rights movement and Black Power era. I looked at the 90s when urban wear was really popular, so thinking about FUBU and Rockaware and all of these other brands. And then I thought about present day fashion designers in New York and how they were grappling with Black Lives Matter. And so each chapter kind of worked twofold. So one, how are Black people using clothing in these ways of resistance, in these ways of protecting their bodies, in these ways of kind of narrating their bodies in these very public spaces, as far as visual culture is concerned. But then how is the mainstream fashion industry responding to that? And so in the 60s and 70s, finding that all of these Black models start to appear on the cover of mainstream fashion publications, but is that a result of kind of them seeing Black folks as a trend through their pride and unity? Because by the late 90s, 2000s, Black people aren't appearing on the cover of magazines anymore. And so clearly there was a shift, the same way I said again with Ceci and the 90s sitcoms. And then with urban wear, comparing brands like FUBU and Rockaware and all of these Black-owned brands to brands like Tommy Hilfiger and Ralph Lauren, who really thrived off of marketing their products to Black consumers and featuring them in their advertisements, etc. And these companies, after the urban wear trend was over, returned to their American prep styles. But these Black-owned brands didn't succeed. And so there is no more FUBU. There is no more, of these Black-owned brands. And kind of, again, the issue with capital and resources in those areas. And then the last chapter, thinking about, I moved to New York a little bit, maybe 2 weeks after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. And so I actually wrote the third chapter to my thesis first because I was really trying to figure out the worth of the Black body, and that's really kind of what was working throughout my entire thesis. Like, how do we have this movement called Black Lives Matter, and how are we actually thinking about the value of Black bodies in all of these different spaces? And so my challenge was to think about the value of Black bodies and the value of Blackness in the American fashion system, which is this very visual space that even if you don't think that you're a part of fashion, even if you don't think that you're fashionable, these images that you consume oftentimes are pushed out by the mainstream fashion industry. And they tell us what's the norm, they tell us what's in, and we think that that's just about clothing. But no, that's about race, it's about body size, that's about all of these different things, right? It's about gender and sexuality. And so a big part of me and the work that I do now, and the work that stems from that thesis is really holding that industry accountable for the role that they play in normalizing all of these things.
And what's the work you're most excited about right now that you're doing?
The work that I'm most excited about right now?
That's
not
out yet.
That's not out yet?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this is surprisingly a little bit unrelated.
Okay.
Because this year I challenged myself to writing more personal things. I mean, all the work that I do is personal because I'm a Black woman writing about Black things. But I'm working on an essay about my grandmother, who I call Nana. And I've actually been working on it since 2014. And so she was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's, I think earlier that year, a year prior to 2014. And I didn't realize, and I've always been very close with my Nana, but I didn't realize that I had never asked about her. That I was she's always taken me to the library and did things for me, but I didn't know anything about my family history. And so a lot of the story is about me coming to terms with the fact that she's losing her memory while I'm still trying to hold on to the past. And she's really not the one holding on to it because she doesn't realize what's going on with her mind. But I'm just like trying to pull for pieces from her. And so she's from Little Rock, Arkansas. And so I just went to Little Rock, Arkansas last month, first time in about 9 years. I went to the library and tried to piece as much as I could together about her. And so, yeah, my challenge is to finish that essay by the end of this year and get it published. And it's a lot of moving parts to that about kind of Alzheimer's and how that affects families, and also just family history and also the outside history that works around that. So I went to the Little Rock 9 center when I was in Little Rock, Arkansas. And my Nana was in her 20s at the time, so it didn't necessarily, she wasn't involved in it in any type of way. But how do these histories also work alongside her personal history? And how can I come to terms with figuring out who I am? Because I think that one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is I've always been obsessed with African American history. When I was applying to undergraduate schools, I refused to apply to a school that didn't have an African American Studies department, and I didn't know. I just refused to do that. And I have a minor in Black Studies, and so, but I never actually took the time to sit with myself and say, why are you so obsessed with like Black history, African American history? And it's not that I shouldn't be, but just why? And it really what's being revealed as I work on this essay is that it's because I don't know a lot of my history. And so I've just like hoped that through digging through all of these other archives and resources and all this work that I've been doing over all of these years, that maybe I'd find myself in that, when really I need to do the work over here to figure out who I am. And so the essay is really personal. The work is really personal, and it's opening up a lot of things. I'm going to a residency in New Orleans at the end of this month to write the essay. And so hopefully it'll be out and people will read it and be encouraged to piece together their narratives and histories and stuff too.
I'm gonna read it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm really excited about right now. That's what's driving me. I can't like focus on anything. I should, but
I have one grandparent that is still alive, and the same thing.
Yeah, you don't realize it because they're your grandparents, and there's like you look at them like they're just supposed to be grandma and grandpa, and it's just like, oh, thank you, like, they're around and everything, and then they pass on, and you feel like that's also what they're supposed to do because they're old and everything, but not realizing that you don't get a lot of that time and a lot of those stories from them. And so she's in a nursing home, and even though sometimes she's piecing it together on her own, but I record her all the time because there might be an inkling of something in there that
just happens to pop out.
That pops out. So yeah, it's exciting work. That's what I'm excited about right now.
Let's flip the script. Advice
for
a young writer.
Okay.
Because you said earlier it's difficult.
It is difficult. You have to be committed to the craft, and I think that's whatever you choose to do. You have to be committed to it. I think that I am transparent enough to say that I discovered at a young age what I wanted to do. And not exactly, but I knew the ways in which I wanted to live my life. In the 7th grade, I figured out I wanted to be a writer. I had a poet by the name of Dr. Shirley LaFleur, who lives in St. Louis, and she opened my eyes to poetry and writing and told me that I could have a career in writing. And from then, you couldn't tell me anything else. I wasn't going to be anything else because when I would go home and when I would write and when I would do my homework and all these other things, like that is what fulfilled me the most. And that's what I found purpose in. And so, I'll be transparent enough to say I was lucky in that area. But whenever you find that thing that wakes you up in the morning, that thing that you cannot live without, you have to commit yourself to it. And you commit yourself to it in several ways. I'm never going to say, just quit your job and just do what you love. No, that's not realistic for everyone, but sometimes that means, you work your job or you work several jobs and then you come home and you work on that thing that you're most passionate about. And if you put the work into it, it'll come. One of the greatest pieces of advice I got from a friend that was later affirmed by my mother, or it might have been vice versa. Sorry, Mom, if I said someone else gave me advice instead of you. But it's just a lot of people are striving to be different. I mean, it's 2018. Like, not many things are original anymore. But you should strive for excellence in every single thing that you do. And in pursuing your craft, strive for excellence. And those opportunities will come. There are seeds that, I planted so very long ago that I didn't know what it would amount to. If you would have told me that I would have been a writer, educator, and scholar by now, I would have been like, no, I'm going to be like an editor-in-chief of a major fashion publication, which isn't impossible in my career or my lifetime. But everything that I've done in putting writing first has manifested into who I am today. And I hope will be who I am in the future. And so commit yourself to your craft, and don't be afraid to take a step back. Sometimes we sign up for opportunities that we hope are going to get us to the next best thing. But sometimes they drain us, or sometimes they're not good for us, or sometimes those environments are unhealthy, and your well-being is important. And so I understand the whole narrative about sleepless nights and all those other things to make your dreams come true. But take care of yourself. You cannot, you can't grind well if you don't treat yourself well. And so that's extremely important. And then I guess the last piece of advice is just like, pursue things that get you to your greater good. Figure out what your greater good is, what you want it to look like, what you want it to be, write it down, and pursue opportunities that are in line with that. If it takes you outside of yourself, if it takes you outside of your greater good, then it's probably not good for you.
It's not worth your time.
It's not worth it, and it's bringing you stress and anxiety and all those different things. Your greater good is important, and everyone has it in them. So pursue those things.
So before we go, what's your greater good?
My greater good. I had this website once, and I thought that the bio was so clever. It was really bad though. But one of the lines in the bio was, Rikki hopes that one day she'll change the world with her pen. And that's still my hope. That's still my greater good, is that I intend to change the world with my words.
It takes one. You know what I mean?
Yes. Just go to the laptop and write. Yes. Sometimes I avoid it, but
and where can people find you? It's pretty easy.
Rikki Byrd, RIKKIBYRD on every network. Every network, and then rikkibyrd.com. That's where I am. I got lucky.
All right.
Thank you.
And it's a very memberable name, Rikki.
Rikki.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a writer's name.
Thank you. I'm destined.
Yes. Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you for being on the show.
This has been great. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you're in St. Louis, visit us on a Thursday night. Details at vincafstl.org. And connect with us on social at We Are Slam or at Venture Cafe STL. Thanks for listening.
This is where it all begins.